They called them the Billionaire's Triplets, three idle storms wrapped in privilege, untamed and unstoppable. No maid ever lasted longer than a single day inside that mansion of glass and gold. Some ran out crying, and some refused to speak of what they saw. But when a quiet black woman arrived one gray morning, carrying nothing but an old leather bag and calm in her eyes, everything changed. The mansion didn't know it yet, but its walls were about to remember what humanity felt like. A crying, and what justice sounded like when it finally spoke. Without words, the mansion sat on a lonely hill overlooking the city like a monument to excess. Glah and glasses, windows glinting even when the sun hid behind clouds. It belonged to one of the richest men in the state, a figure so powerful that even whispers about his name made people lower their voices. Inside those walls, money flowed like water, but warmth had long evaporated. What remained was order, control, and the sound of three young lives running wild through rooms too big for laughter to fill. The triplets, glass, all 7 years old. H, all, Hadad, the faces of angels and the temper of kings. They were beautiful, untouchable, and completely unmanageable. Tutors quit, caregivers broke down, and maids walked out the same day they arrived. It wasn't just the noise or the mess or the tantrums that sent them fleeing. It was something deeper, something unspoken. They said the children had learned early that power could be cruel. That cruelty, in a house that worshipped wealth, was almost expected. The father, always away in meetings or overseas, blamed the staff. He believed loyalty could be bought like furniture. That care came with a paycheck. So when another maid left, he didn't flinch. He just ordered the agency to send another. But this time, the woman who answered the call was not like the others. Her name was Naomi Carter, a 40-year-old widow who'd spent her life cleaning houses that were never hers. Her hands were small but strong, her posture straight despite years of bowing. She spoke little, smiled rarely, and carried the quiet of someone who had seen more than most would dare to remember. To her, this job was not just a paycheck. It was survival. She needed it. Yet something else brought her there too. Something even she couldn't name. Maybe it was the strange pull of a challenge everyone else feared. Maybe it was the memory of the world telling her what she couldn't handle. When she arrived, the mansion looked like it had swallowed a storm. Toys littered the hallways. One of the triplets had drawn on the marble floor with red paint. The youngest had locked himself in the pantry and refused to come out. The housekeeper, pale and trembling, met Naomi at the door and whispered, "They don't listen to anyone. You won't last an hour." Naomi just nodded, stepping inside with calm steps. The air smelled of polish and loneliness. Portraits of the family lined the walls. Something. The father in tailored suits. The mother long gone from the frame, as though erased from their story. The children's faces were captured in staged perfection, yet their eyes, even in photographs, carried something wild. When Naomi met them, they didn't look up. Three small figures sat on the grand staircase, identical in features, but different in the way they stared. One defiant, one curious, one distant. They were not used to kindness, nor to boundaries that weren't screamed into existence. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She simply placed her bag down, took a slow breath, and began to tidy the chaos around her. Something shifted then. But almost imperceptibly. The children watched her move, silent, waiting for her to break the way others had. But Naomi didn't flinch when they spilled juice or shouted orders like tiny tyrants. She didn't beg or bribe. She just worked, almost. Calm, deliberate, calm, deliberate, and othered. By the end of that first day, the house was still standing, the children still deliberate, And children were testing. And Naomi Stickhildren were Naomi Wazel there. The staff whispered in disbelief. No one had lasted this long without tears, anger, or quitting. That night, as the city lights flickered below the hill, Naomi sat alone in the servants' quarters, staring at an old photograph of her own son. Naomi was a boy whose laughter had once filled her world, until it didn't anymore. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "One day at a time." What she didn't know was that in teaching these children peace, she'd soon uncover the reason behind their cruelty. A 1A and in the darkness, money had been hiding all along. The next morning began with a sound that had become routine in that house. Breaky and breaking in glass. Somewhere in the East Wing, one of the triplets had shattered a vase worth more than Naomi's annual salary. The head housekeeper rushed toward the commotion, already rehearsing her apologies. But Naomi didn't run. She simply walked, slow, breaking, slowly, steady. Slowly, steadily, Nafraid. In the grand dining room, the three children stood among the shards. The oldest, Ethan, glared like a general daring someone to challenge him. The middle one, Liam, smirked in quiet defiance, while the youngest, Noah, trembled, steadily, a child trapped between fear and imitation. "What are you waiting for?" Ethan barked, his voice unnervingly adult. "Clean it up. That's your job." Naomi knelt, her reflection fractured across the marble. She picked up each shard carefully, not answering. When her silence stretched too long, Ethan kicked one piece toward her hand. The sharp edge grazed her palm, a thin line of red blooming against brown skin. The housekeeper gasped. Naomi didn't. Instead, she looked up, her eyes steady. Not angry, but something deeper. Disappointed. "If you're old enough to break it," she said softly. "You're old enough to help clean it." The words fell like a stone into still water. No one had ever spoken to them that way. And disappointed. Notot, without fear. Ethan froze, unsure whether to laugh or scream. But Naomi stood, fetched a small broom, and handed it to him. For the first time, the child hesitated before obeying. That afternoon, whispers spread among the staff. The new maid had made the billionaire's son clean up. Everyone said she wouldn't last the week. But when the father's personal assistant reported it, the man barely looked up from his papers. "If she's doing her job, let her," he said coldly. "Just make sure she doesn't talk to the press." Days passed. The triplets tried everything to make her quit. They poured water on freshly mopped floors. They hid her supplies. They even locked her out one rainy afternoon. Yet every time, Naomi returned with that same calm, "Tut, not," the kind that unnerved children used to chaos. But beneath that composure, something else stirred. She began noticing small things. The bruises that didn't look accidental, the way the children flinched at certain sounds, the bruises sounds, and silence that followed their father's phone calls. The mansion wasn't just a playground for spoiled heirs. It was a machine of loneliness, powered by money and absence. One evening, she found Liam crying in the corner of the study. He wiped his face quickly, pretending to be angry. "You're not supposed to see that," he said. Naomi didn't comfort him with touch, sounds, and he knew better. Instead, she said quietly, "Sometimes people cry when they're tired of pretending they're strong." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him to think about it. The next morning, he brought her a broken toy soldier and asked if she could fix it. Bit by bit, the walls began to crack. And not the ones made of marble, but the ones around 3 small hearts. Ethan stopped yelling as much. Noah started humming when she cleaned. Liam began helping without being asked, but not everyone liked the change. The head housekeeper, who had served the family for 15 years, pulled Naomi aside one afternoon. "You're getting too close," she warned. "This family doesn't like when staff forget their place. Especially your kind," Naomi didn't respond. She'd heard that tone before, for not from neighbors, supervisors, STR, from supervisors, and dangers in stores. She understood it wasn't personal. It was systemic. The housekeeper wasn't defending cruelty. She was surviving it. Still, Naomi refused to step back, because she could see what others refused to. Supervisors. And that these children weren't monsters. They were mirrors, and the reflection staring back at them was shaped by generations of unchecked power and quiet prejudice. The turning point came 2 weeks later. During one of the father's rare visits, he arrived in a sleek black car, surrounded by silence that seemed to bow before him. The children straightened immediately, fear disguised as respect. Naomi, dusting a bookshelf nearby, noticed how the air changed. His presence filled the room like cold smoke. He was a tall man, handsome in the way statues are, impressive, immovable, impressive, immovable, and dealing. When his eyes landed on Naomi, they paused, assessing. "You're the new maid," he said flatly. "The one who lasted." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, then turned to his children. "I hope she's teaching you discipline." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but Naomi saw the flicker of dread in his eyes. Before the boy could respond, she said gently, "They're learning, sir." "Just differently." The man's gaze hardened. "Differently doesn't always mean better. Remember your place. It wasn't just a correction. It was a reminder of hierarchy, immovable, and of who was allowed to guide and who was meant to serve." The words hung heavy, but Naomi only nodded. That night she found Noah hiding under his bed. He whispered, "He's mad again. He says we make him look weak." Naomi didn't promise him safety. She couldn't. But she whispered back, "Then be kind. That's the strongest thing you can be." From then on, the house changed quietly. The children began greeting her in the mornings. They waited for her stories about simple things, about growing up in a small town, about her son who used to draw pictures of stars. They laughed softly, like laughter was something fragile that might break if used too loudly. But the more peace grew, the more resistance followed. The head housekeeper complained Naomi was overstepping, that her influence was inappropriate. The father began watching her closely, his pride prickled by something he couldn't name. Cloudly. The sight of his children obeying love instead of fear. And then came the day everything cracked open. A storm rolled through that morning, thunder shaking the windows. Naomi was in the kitchen when she heard shouting upstairs. When she arrived, the father was standing over Ethan, anger trembling in his voice. The boy had refused to recite a phrase his father used to make him repeat. The money makes the man." Naomi didn't think. Money. He stepped between them. Her voice was calm, but her presence was firm. "He's just a child," she said. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. No one had ever stood up to that man before. His jaw tightened. "You forget who pays you," he said quietly. Naomi met his gaze, unflinching. "And you forget who's watching you." The triplets stared, wide-eyed, she wide-eyed, silent. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment that rewrote the laws of that house. The father said nothing more. He turned and left, his silence louder than any threat. After that, Naomi knew her days there were numbered. But she also knew something had changed forever. The children had seen a kind of courage they'd never witnessed before. Wide-eyed. Not the loud kind, but the kind that stands its ground even when trembling. The morning after the storm, silence clung to the mansion like dust. No laughter, no running feet, no sound except the faint hum of rain still trickling down the windows. Naomi felt it the moment she entered. Not The he kind of silence that hides something. By midday, she learned what? The father had called the agency. Her position was no longer required. No explanation, no farewell. Just a check on the counter and instructions to leave before evening. The staff avoided her eyes, but their whispers filled the halls. He didn't like how she talked back. He said she's overstepping. She should have known better. Naomi packed her few belongings slowly, each motion deliberate, her heart heavy but not surprised. She'd lived enough years to know that truth often costs the one who speaks it. Still, something inside her resisted. Not for herself, but for the 3 children she'd come to love. Just children who had begun to believe that kindness wasn't weakness. When she turned to leave, she found them waiting in the foyer. Ethan stood tall but trembling. Liam's eyes were wet, and Noah clutched her old leather bag as though it could keep her from disappearing. "You can't go," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "He can't do that," Naomi smiled softly. "He can, and he did. But we'll go back to before," Noah whispered. "We'll forget." She knelt beside them, brushing a hand over Noah's curls. "You won't forget," she said gently. "You'll remember what you saw. You'll remember that being good doesn't make you small." Then, before she could stand, the father appeared at the top of the stairs. His eyes were cold steel, his voice controlled. "That's enough. Children, upstairs." None of them moved. Ethan stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "She's not like the others." The father's jaw tightened. "You don't speak to me that way." Naomi rose slowly, standing between them. "They're not afraid of you anymore," she said, and children, notot, as a challenge, but as a truth too heavy to stay unspoken. The man descended a step, rage simmering beneath his composure. "You think you've changed something here?" he said. "You're just a maid." Naomi met his gaze, calm as ever. "Then why does it scare you that I did?" The silence that followed was electric. Every word, every wound, Eve, not wound, Andrew moment of quiet resistance between them collided in that space. The truth was naked now, thwound, and that at a woman with no power had undone the illusion of control in a house built on it. The father turned sharply and walked out, slamming the door behind him. His car roared down the driveway, tires cutting through rain-soaked gravel. Naomi exhaled, feeling the mansion exhale with her. But her relief was short-lived. Hours later, 2 men in dark suits arrived. Security from the family's corporate office. They said she needed to leave immediately. No security immediately, with contact with the children. "Company policy," one said. She nodded, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As they escorted her out, Ethan burst through the doors, slipping past them before they could stop him. He ran to her, breathless. "You said kindness makes you strong," he panted. "So I'll be strong." He held something out, immediately, with a small folded piece of paper. Naomi took it with trembling fingers. Inside was a childish drawing, 3 stick figures and a woman with a broom. Above them, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Our family." Her chest tightened. She pressed the drawing to her heart and whispered, "Then be that, every day." The car door closed. The mansion disappeared behind her, but something in its walls had shifted forever. That night, she walked the long road toward the bus station, rain still falling in thin silver threads. Her clothes were soaked, her palms rough, her heart breaking. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she felt the smallest flicker of warmth, because she knew Evanin, if the world pretended not to see it. Even, he had planted something real. And in the echo of thunder behind her, she imagined three small voices laughing, learning he, she learning, andling. Months passed, and the world moved on, learning, and us as it always does when the ones who serve disappear. The mansion stayed quiet, its gates closed, its children hidden from the public eye. Yet, inside those walls, something had changed in ways money could never measure. Naomi's absence was a silence the triplets could not fill. Breakfasts were quieter, lessons longer, and laughter as rarera as sunlight in winter. Fad, rare, faded into the corners. The father noticed too, though he never admitted it. He mistook discomfort for discipline, faded discipline, and def for order. He told himself things were finally normal again. But the children had learned the difference between silence and peace. One morning, Ethan refused to come down for breakfast. The housekeeper found him in the old study. Discipline and the he one Naomi used to clean first every day. He was staring at the broken vase, still repaired with glue the way Naomi had once left it, imperfect but whole. Beside it lay the drawing she'd carried until the day she was forced out. Now carefully redraw. They're drawn by the triplets themselves. The father entered, ready to scold, but stopped when he saw it. For the first time in years, he didn't have words. Liam looked up and asked quietly, "Why did you make her leave?" The man froze. The question was a blade dressed as innocence. He wanted to say it was about boundaries. Professionalism, Conry-drawn professionalism. Antrol, professionalism, and, but it beneath those excuses. Something darker stirred. The discomfort of seeing someone he'd been taught to overlook show strength he couldn't command. He didn't answer. He simply turned and left the room. That night, he sat alone in his office, staring at old photographs. Not, but the children, but of his late wife. She had been kind, soft-spoken, and endlessly patient. The same qualities he once mistook for weakness. The same qualities Naomi had carried like armor. And for the first time, he wondered if he'd built his empire not on strength, but on fear. Across the city, Naomi had found work in a small daycare. The pay was modest, the space small, but it was full of warmth. She spent her days teaching children to read, to draw, and to care for one another. Sometimes, when she cleaned the playroom in the evening, she thought of the triplets, their otter, their anger, their eyes slowly learning softness. She never expected to see them again. But one afternoon, months later, the daycare door opened, and three familiar figures stood there. Taller now, quieter, carrying a folded piece of paper. Noah handed it to her with trembling hands. It was another drawing, 3 children and a woman with a broom, surrounded by stars. Beneath it, a few words written in Ethan's uneven script. "You didn't just clean our house. You cleaned our hearts." Naomi felt her knees weaken, her throat tighten. The children hugged her, awkwardly, shyly, but with the kind of love that doesn't ask for permission. Behind them, their father stood by the doorway, older somehow, less certain. He removed his hat as though stepping into sacred ground. "They wouldn't stop asking to see you," he said quietly. "I thought it was time I listened." For a moment, the room held the weight of everything unspoken. Pride, guilt, and respect. Then he said the words she never expected. "Thank you." Naomi nodded, her eyes steady. "Take care of them," she said. "They're still learning what strength really means." He hesitated, then asked, "And what does it mean?" She smiled faintly. "It's not about who commands the room. It's about who brings peace to it." The man said nothing more, but as he turned to leave, his posture carried something new. Humility, maybe, or the beginning of it. When they were gone, Naomi stood for a long while, watching the rain streak the windows. The world outside hadn't changed, still divided by wealth, color, and silence. But inside her, something had settled. She realized that change doesn't always come from revolutions or loud defiance. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the way someone refuses to mirror cruelty, in the way dignity can speak louder than rage. And though her story would never make headlines, it lived on, in three children who learned compassion where arrogance once grew, and in a father who finally saw the humanity he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Naomi locked the daycare for the night and walked into the soft rain, her steps light, her heart full. Somewhere behind her, laughter rose, high, free, and unrestrained. It was the sound of healing. She smiled, whispering to the night, one day at a time. And maybe, just maybe, the world listened.